consistency of watery pancake batter. And I happened to go to the lower level of the house where the media room was going to be, and these folks were working above me, and all of a sudden, gypsum just starts pouring through the ceiling. Welcome to the Fine Homebuilding Podcast, our weekly discussion of building, remodeling, and design topics aimed at anybody who cares deeply about the craft and science of working on houses. This is Senior Editor Patrick McComb. Today I'm joined by Rob Wadzak, Digital Brand Manager.
Good morning, Patrick.
Kiley Jacques, Senior Editor, Green Building Advisor.
Hello. And
producer Jeff Rose.
Hi there.
Well, it's great to see you all this morning. I had to cut Kiley off earlier because we had to get the show going, right, Kiley?
It's getting a little off track.
I know. I think you got a little bit of my audio over your intro there, Patrick, so I don't know. You might have to re-record that.
Well, it's going to have to do. These folks don't listen to this part of the show anyway. What have y'all been doing with your time?
Oh, you always got a long list. You know that.
I loved seeing. So, tell folks about your most recent purchase because it's so practical. Let's hear.
You're talking about my hot tub?
I didn't know you got a hot tub.
Well, yeah, if you can call it that. It basically looks like someone just bent an air mattress into a circle and like you could fill it with water. But I haven't tried it yet.
It's like the one Kramer had in Seinfeld that caused that poor runner to be late for the New York City Marathon.
Well, so, you know, I had been making plans to build a small plunge pool, which is bigger than a hot tub, smaller than a pool, in my backyard, and it just started getting more and more complicated, and my wife is getting more and more depressed that it wasn't going to happen. So I just went online, and I didn't think I would be able to get one because you can't get anything these days, but it came in 2 days. And
did you buy it from Amazon?
I did.
It's crazy, Rob. So you can buy a hot tub from Amazon and it comes 2 days later.
Yes.
You can buy a tiny house from Amazon.
I tried.
Can you?
Yeah.
It's like
a kid house.
Yeah, but I try not to buy too much stuff from Amazon if I can avoid it, but it's the kind of thing I wasn't going to be able to find it locally. You know, the pool stores I went to have nothing in stock.
I hear the pool installers are booked for, the year. That they have as much work as they could possibly do.
I need to tell you guys something. I was recently speaking with a builder who used a septic tank he modified a septic tank.
That was my first plan. That was my first plan.
Actually,
I actually
a guy in Hudson Valley that you turned me on to. Everett Kramer. It's amazing. It looks fantastic. And he did most of it himself.
I'm assuming it wasn't in use as a septic tank before it became a swimming pool. Okay, that's the part I was really kind of disturbed by.
Anyway, go ahead, Rob.
No, so I saw the picture of his. Is his all done now? Because I only saw shots of it going in.
I'm not sure. Those are the same photos I saw too. He was in the midst of it. But
so yeah, it's a precast concrete tank, and you can call the precast places and have them make them any way you want, custom, because they normally have baffles and holes in them for all the plumbing parts for septic. And I had actually called up a place, and they were going to cast me a 12-foot diameter one. With no baffles and no holes in it. And the one that Everett got, I was pricing out at around $1,500 for the concrete tank.
That sounds like I think that's what he said about that, yeah.
Though the size that I wanted was going to be like almost $7,000. And I was like, I could get a whole pool kit for that much money, but actually you can't right now.
Actually you can't, right?
So it was getting a little too pricey, so I kind of put it off for now. I might try to get one of those kits next year. I found this guy in California who sells insulated kits. It's kind of crazy. It's EPS foam walls. It's almost like you're doing ICFs, but it doesn't get filled with concrete. It gets backfilled with gravel and plastered with a structural plaster, and it's kind of elaborate. You could tell the guy who designed the system is an engineer. Is an engineer. It's like got this mesh that gets embedded in the plaster that drapes over, that gets embedded in the concrete grade beam that goes around the thing, and it sounds complicated, but it looks like the least labor intensive and least concrete intensive option that I've found. And it's like the kit was like $3,000.
So have you dipped in your hot tub yet? Is it up and running?
No. The picture I just sent you this morning. So this morning, last night and early this morning, I was working on. I have an outdoor GFCI electrical outlet on my patio, and it's one of those ones with little flippy metal doors, and so it wasn't going to be completely covered when it was open, and it's got the tub has this massive GFCI plug on it, and I went and got a new cover with one of those clear plastic doors, a big cover for the exterior outlet, and I had to make some slight modifications in it to fit that big plug in there. I took my multi-tool out and cut a square hole in the bottom of the thing. But I mean, it's the bottom, so it's facing downward, and it's under my roof, that new roof I built, so it's protected from the weather. But
where are you putting this thing?
Well, ultimately it's going to go out by my barn, but I need to do some wiring in my barn before I do that and move a bunch of junk that's sitting in front of my barn. And it was going to be days of work to get it out to the barn, and
you can't wait. You're just like chomping at the bit to get in this thing. Yeah.
So it was a good excuse to repair a busted old GFCI outlet anyway that's by my barbecue grill. I had to move the grill temporarily, and now the hot tub's going to go up there tonight.
Isn't it funny how one project leads to another?
Oh my God, that's like the story of my life. Like every project I come up with has like 4 projects that
you have to do beforehand.
That I have to do before I get to that one.
Kylie, what have you been doing?
Oh, I've been dealing with the Vermont housing market. I think I've mentioned to you both a number of times or all three of you.
Oh, this is not the time to be buying a house in Vermont, I bet.
But it sure is the time to be selling my house. I spoke with a real estate agent about my place. Be such a fool not to sell right now. I could make some nice
except
money.
If you can't move somewhere else.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, I can't even find an apartment, but it was shocking to me. I had no idea because I hadn't been paying close attention because I had, anyway, when I finally got into looking at things and finding houses and people are paying, I found the sweetest little place, and, small houses are hard to find. This place went for, it was listed at $270K, and somebody bought it sight unseen for, I don't know what they paid, but above listing price, cash. Who's got that kind of money laying around?
People who sold their place in New York City.
Yeah. Anyway, it was a rude awakening. I realized I've been completely priced out of the market, and I need to settle down and make peace with being here. And luckily, I do love, as you've pointed out, Patrick, I love my landscape, and I've put thousands and thousands of dollars into it, and it would be hard to leave it. So, I have a sweet little place, and soon the office will open. And so I need to calm down and wait for the market to shift, because there's just absolutely no way I can buy
Or you could get a tent and you could squat on someone else's property in Vermont.
Honestly, I've got a few friends looking for places. If I had more land, I'd just buy a bunch of old RVs and rent them out for $50 a month to my friends.
Yeah, there are ways to go.
I never took you for the slumlord type, Rob, but strange times we're living in anyway.
Anyway, it's interesting to follow the market, and I'm sure it's not, of course it's not unique to Vermont, but
I'm betting, and I don't know this, of course, the Vermont is the especially coveted place right now for folks to move to, right?
And there are very few houses. I mean, there's just not a lot on the market right now, so.
There's not a lot of houses in Vermont, period, right?
Period, exactly, yeah.
Jeff, what have you been doing?
Other than some yard work, some automotive maintenance, exciting things like that.
Like changing oil and stuff?
No, actually replace the exhaust system on the Honda.
Oh, how was that? That's always a fun project.
Yeah, well, it's one of those projects that in the history of the world has never gone to plan, But it's done.
I always find sawzalls involved in exhaust work, which...
Exactly, yep.
Yeah.
Or angle grinders.
Angle grinders, right?
I got both in there, so I'm covered.
Did you guys hear that story about how people are stealing catalytic converters these days? I don't know if that's not new, or it was news to me. It's pretty wild.
The first time I heard about that, I was in Boston on a photo shoot, and the guys on the crew were telling me that there were people who were going to the commuter lots for the train stations that lead into Boston and like stealing them from 10 cars at a time, because they know these folks are at work for 8 or 9 hours, right? And they're not going to be noticing that till they come back.
So they're rolling around on their backs with a Sawzall in the parking lot?
Yeah, exactly. And nobody thought this was, a problem who was observing this. I bet you guys can tell what I've been working on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's looking good.
So for those of you listening and can't see, but behind me are new shelves that I put up to hold my various things that I love. And it's the library wall of storage that I've always wanted.
What's on that shelf, the stacked unit behind you, Patrick? It looks like, at least I see some oil, but what are all those little jars?
Oh my gosh, that's my very vast collection of automotive chemicals. Do any of you need any Honda power steering fluid?
You sure do have a lot
totally overbought on that. Yeah, transmission fluid. I bought a bunch of cans of Eastwood black undercoat spray paint for a motorcycle that Brian Pontalillo pawned off on me that then I was able to sell to some other sucker. So if you guys need a chassis black, I got that too. This is all in an effort to make room for my mechanics tool chest that I just bought from Home Depot and is going to be delivered to the store, I hope, next week. Because, for decades, I've had my mechanics tools all over the place. And I'm getting to the point where I decided I want a tool chest, so I bought it.
Nice.
Good for you.
Now you need to build that carport to actually put a car under.
I know. And my real hope is to never work on cars ever again, so I don't know why I'm doing this, but anyway. So we heard from Jim P. From Saratoga Springs. Hi, Matt, Kiley, and Patrick. Love your podcasts. In episode 346, listener feedback from Dana was discussing the difficulty in finding an energy integrator for a new home build. After much effort, and he quotes her, ultimately, I did find someone who performs all of the design work for custom home builds. He's preparing a bid for our project. He has great references and comes very highly recommended. I just wish we had more experts to choose from. This guy is 1 in a million. And then Jim goes on, but Dana left us hanging and never told us who it was or provide a reference. If Dana provided it to you separately, could you share it with the FHB community? Thanks in advance. Okay, so I asked Dana if we could spill the beans on who this person was. And I heard back from first Dana and then Hans Joachim Price, I think is how you say it. Do you think I did that okay, Kiley?
Yeah, that's about right. Good for
Maybe.
you.
Might be Joachim. I don't know.
Joachim?
Oh, right. Yeah, I guess you're right. Yeah.
He says, I'm certainly fine with having you talk or write about me and our approach. I am as much an educator as I am an integrator, a mechanical designer and building science consultant, and I agree that there need to be more of me. It's rare that building professionals take the time to explain things in great detail, except on reputable platforms like Fine Homebuilding and the Green Building Advisor, where I've been a subscriber for years because I need to educate myself sometimes, or I need a second opinion / reality check. Chances are someone else has had the same problem before me, and if I'm lucky, even written about it. I guess it's urgent that I get my website up and running. Well, I would say it is now, Hans.
You've been exposed.
So Hans's company is named BrightSense, and they do have a website, brightsense.com, but it is just a landing page with nothing up there. So Hans, get to work. That is a cool thing to do, right? Or know about.
So, I was just this week, the KCBS and Beer group had their monthly online meetup, which should be shortly on our website if you go to finehomebuilding.com/webinars. You want to watch the recording, but it was Charla Reed, and she's a former energy rater, but now she does education and certification, and it was a presentation on all the different green building rating systems, and but it kind of evolved into a conversation about if you're really focused on trying to build an energy efficient home, it's like how do you, if you've never done anything like this before, even as a builder, it's like how do you get started? Her recommendation was actually to reach out to a lot of the different rating systems because the raters who work for them know how to sort of get you the right information to get started. So,
or you could call Hans.
Yes. Well, I mean, I assume he's probably one of those people. I'm sure he's probably certified to do HERS or other type of energy rating systems or even the certification based on the kind of work that he does. But it's key to get someone like that in before you even start designing a project. You don't bring them in at the end.
Kiley, is this something you've heard about, this kind of role in the GBA universe?
No, but I predict that it will boom. I see this becoming a budding,
So how do you think one learns how to do this?
I don't know. I mean, Emily Mottram is always talking about the value of getting a HERS rater certification.
Yeah.
So
sure.
I don't know if that's one way that people do it. That would be an interesting thing to hear about from Hans, I guess, because he seems to be the only one out there. How did you get to where you are, Hans?
I want Hans on Pro Talk, so Hans,
that's
if
a
you're
great
listening,
idea.
Yeah. We heard from Mike in Duluth, Minnesota. Quite a while back, a listener wrote in about vacuuming out attic insulation, and a Facebook memory just prompted me to share my method. In preparation for spray foam, I had a bit under 1,000 square feet to remove 6 inches of rock wool, covered in a few inches of loose styrofoam beads. Here was my setup. For a blower/vacuum, I used a 2 horsepower dust collector from Harbor Freight. I replaced the top fabric bag with plastic to force more airflow through the bags. The screen over the inlet needed to be removed. I only locked up the motor a few times with a stray chunk of wood. Bags were created by rolling and duct taping poly into a tube, then covering one end with insulation fabric to allow for airflow. They ended up being about 3 foot in diameter and 10 feet long. These attached to the lower section of the dust collector using a factory band clamp. Tubing was corrugated drain tile called flex drain. The frictional losses were horrendous, but surprisingly it rarely plugged. Some minor adapter work fitted to the inlet of the vacuum. Vacuuming the styrofoam was just like walking an elephant swinging its trunk to pick up the peanuts. The rock wool was a bit more work. It was loose fill, but they weren't quite It wasn't loose fill, but they weren't quite bats either, so I had to paw at it and break off chunks and direct them to the hose end. That sounds horrible. I gave away the rock wool, but blew the styrofoam back in by reversing the inlet/outlet hoses. I created a wire cage to keep the hose off the plastic. It took a little time to empty a bag. After selling the dust collector, I had maybe $200 into the project and was able to work on my own time schedule. Thanks for the motivation, laughs, and information. Mike from Duluth, Minnesota. So I don't know if you guys saw it, but I included Mike's MP4 videos of him doing this with his kids.
Doesn't it look like snow? It goes that high. Means, and it runs through this tube down here. Down, out, and to this bay. And then my dad empties it.
And, Mike and I think are kindred spirits, but I feel bad for his family.
I gotta say, there's so many good things in this story here, because it's like, one, being completely resourceful with the cheapest materials you can find, and just sort of going with the flow, figuring it out as you go along, fixing problems, and then ultimately not only recycling or reusing the materials, but then also selling the equipment when you're done and basically getting most of your money back. I mean, that's just like the perfect scenario. I would hate to see what would happen if one of those homemade plastic bags blew open when he was vacuuming.
What
Mike,
do you think
I
he
love
means
it,
by
love it, love it.
Yeah. He says it wasn't loose fill, but they weren't quite bats either. This is the rock wool. What could it be? I don't get it.
I think it's loose fill, but it was just low-tech loose fill, right?
Oh.
Yeah, and also mineral wool is really dense stuff, so it probably gets packed in there.
Packed down, yeah.
It was probably asbestos.
I didn't do exactly something like this, but the other day I was really bummed because I couldn't find a part to my shop vac that held the filter on, and I was going to order a part, then I was going to make a part, and I was like, wait a second. I just took a big piece of zip flashing tape, and taped the filter to the inside of my vacuum, and it worked fine.
Of course
I saw zip all over a car recently. That stuff is becoming the new duct tape.
Oh, but it's way better.
But way better.
Yeah.
I've seen a number of vehicles on construction sites with like repairs made with zip tape. It's flashing tape. It's perfect.
It's way better than the old duct tape repairs you used to see, you know.
This comes from Tom. Hello, FHB Podcast. In episode 342, you read a letter from a listener about applying nuclear industry safety ideas to the job site. You might be interested to know that there's an alternate approach to safety that's developed over the past dozen or so years, based around principles of human and organizational performance. It doesn't look at workers as a problem to be solved, but considers workers the problem solvers. It abandons the idea that all accidents are preventable and instead considers safety to be not the absence of accidents, but the presence of capacity to respond to adverse conditions. Does a worker make a bad choice, or does a worker have a bad choice? Can we ask what failed instead of who failed? Dr. Todd Conklin, formerly of Los Alamos National Laboratory, gives a fantastic introduction to this new view of safety in this presentation to a group of steelworkers. He linked a YouTube video that we'll put up on the podcast page. Most of Conklin's focus is on high-risk organizations like manufacturing and petroleum, and would need some amount of translation to be applicable to the residential construction workplace. But with the frequent discussions of workplace safety on the FHB podcast, I thought you'd find this as interesting as I have. And there's much more. Conklin has a podcast, he's written several books, and there are a number of others doing similar work. Tom, I'm not exactly sure that I get what's going on here, but it's interesting.
I mean, I like the whole philosophy behind it, because the point is, and I was listening to some kind of Buddhist meditation thing recently, and they were talking about how, like,
it does sort of
if you don't have problems, it's hard to appreciate the good stuff. And I kind of feel like the same kind of thing applies here. It's like, if you don't ever have accidents, if you don't ever have situations where you have to do problem solving, you're never going to be prepared for those problems when they arise.
You know,
the accidents that I've experienced are just my own dumb behavior, so I think I am the problem.
Well, but I mean, I imagine in this kind of stuff, when you're talking about, an entire power plant that has, thousands of valves and switches and alarms and, there's bound to have the failures once in a while, right?
I kind of think it's an apple and oranges thing, though, because like a power plant or the petroleum industry has like procedures to do everything, right? There's a spelled out way to do it. There's none of that exists in residential construction. I mean, sadly, but that's just the facts.
Yeah, I feel like in our industry, remodelers are probably the most well prepared to do this sort of problem solving, just because you go into almost every situation not knowing what you're going to find, and you have to basically think on the fly. So if everyone's going to write the residential version of this thing, it's going to be some seasoned remodeling contractor.
Jeff, what do you think about this?
I mean, I kind of understand the approach, but again, I don't know how applicable it is.
I don't know.
So there's got to be people who know way more about this than I do that could weigh in. So if any of you out there have any thoughts on this, love to hear it. This comes from Derek. Hello, esteemed FHB podcasters. Hearing your tales of regimented routine for the exchange of degraded fuel from one machine to another to prevent engine damage wore me out and made me think that there has to be a better way to spend your summers there out east.
I think we have that effect on people.
Living in California and regularly using portable generators for both remote work sites and to subsidize our local utility grid for winter and summer outages, the subject of which fuel to use for long-term storage between these events is a frequent topic for discussion. The collective answer is jet fuel. If you have a county airport nearby, there's typically a self-service pump available where you can dispense aviation fuel into a portable can at a cost that is not that much higher than standard gasoline, but the absence of additives and thinners that can degrade to leave you with a tank full of varnish faster than you can say, public safety power shutoff. The old timers will tell you that this fuel lasts forever. Google says slightly less than forever, but anecdotally, the local generator repair shops recommend it to their customers, and the fact that my generator always starts on the first pull is one more for the plus column, but then again, it is a Honda. Love your show and keep up the craft. So it's not jet fuel that he's talking about. It's AV gas, because jet fuel is kerosene, right? You can't run kerosene in your gas engine. But so once again, I went to my friend in, I don't even know if I should disclose his location, because his identity is supposed to be kept secret. But this gentleman is in the petroleum research business, and I asked him about this because I looked up what AV gas is, and it's got 100 octane, and it's also got lead in it. So I asked if this was indeed okay. And he says AV gas, aviation gasoline, is used by small aircraft, light helicopters, and vintage piston-engined aircraft. Its formulation is distinct from conventional gasoline used in motor vehicles, which is commonly called MoGas or autogas in aviation context. Although it comes in many different grades, its 100 octane rating is higher than that for regular gasoline, which varies between 91 in the United States and 95 in Europe. AV gas is the only remaining lead-containing transportation fuel. Lead in AV gas prevents damaging engine knock or detonation that can result in a sudden engine failure. He says it's okay to put this in your generator, but you shouldn't be using leaded gas, I would say.
Mm.
Yeah. You know, I did go and look at the Danbury airport, and there's a couple of small businesses there, support businesses, and they all list, providing fuel as a service. I couldn't really gather from their websites whether or not they'd let you walk in off the street with a can.
I know. This seemed very clandestine to me.
But it was...
Are you siphoning it in the night? Or?
Siphoning it out of the planes. I know where there's a small plane on the lake we could siphon some gas out of. But it was $5.10 a gallon, though, just so you know.
Well, that's a lot. That's way more than we pay for gas.
Yeah. But you know one other alternative, not for maybe running a generator long term, but for small engines or for occasional, like just to keep some fuel in there to run it once in a while, is I know Tractor Supply sells it, and probably other machinery support places sell it, is these cans of gasoline that doesn't have the ethanol in them, that's made for machines, small engines that sit for a while. I mean, obviously you're not going to run a generator for hours on this stuff, but if it's just something you're keeping in there to run it periodically, and then you just fill it up with regular gas when it's time to actually fire it up.
That's what my mystery chemist said too, is like these canned fuels you buy at the home center or at the Tractor Supply or the auto parts store are very good for this application, and they don't have lead. And as you point out, Rob, you don't need to run the machine in that gas. It's just for storage, right? But you'd have to empty the tank of the other fuel. You know, it's still a hassle. Maybe I'm just going to buy some AV gas and get on with my life.
Well, you figure if you're running a generator, you just, when you're done using it for some emergency, you run it dry, put a little bit of this stuff in there for storage, and then keep a can of regular gas handy when it's time to fire it back up again, and maybe test it a few times in between with the canned stuff. I know it's not that much. It's not that much less of a hassle than what we were talking about.
One more reason to get a power wall.
Derek, this is going to reward you for your snarky letter. We're talking about gas again. Greetings, FHP podcasters. I've been listening since episode 1. I'm hoping you can offer some advice on a new project. I've recently sold my previous home and purchased a 1960s Cape here in northern coastal Massachusetts. The original home has a poured concrete foundation, but a 25 by 15 foot addition that was added sometime in the 90s has no basement. The main part of the addition is supported by a concrete block pier supporting 2x8 floor joists, but the joists at that extreme front and back of the space, which I suspect were at some point outside porch decks, sit on 4x4 posts supported by 10-inch concrete sonotube footings. The room is drafty and the floor is cold. The addition has some shoddily built 3-foot tall skirt walls between the floor platform and the ground, made of 2x4s and T111 sheathing. But there's no chance of making those walls airtight to create a sealed crawl space without doing some serious excavating and constructing some real foundation walls. So it's essentially an open platform with some fiberglass insulation applied to the underside between the joists. The fiberglass is mostly useless, as with no supporting layer beneath it, much has fallen away from the floor sheathing over the years. And the space is now being leased out as luxury condos by the local housing authority. So my question, what approach do I take to insulate and air seal this floor system? I've done a bit of research, but all the articles on Crawlspaces seem to assume that there are concrete walls and that the space can really be tightly sealed. This space definitely cannot be, or at least not without some serious foundation work. My idea is to replace the old insulation with 8 inches of mineral wool, then apply 2 inches of foam insulation to the underside of the joists, sealing that foam layer's joints with spray foam to create an air sealing layer. Is this approach reasonable? Do I need another fireproofing layer under the foam, or can I just leave that exposed to the ground below? XPS, EPS, or polyiso? And should I try to apply a layer of 6 mil poly sheeting along the ground, maybe run up the insides of those skirt walls, and somehow tie the sheeting into the floor foam layer to help eliminate any ground vapor? Any advice or better approaches or critiques of my intended approach above? Steve, I think you got it pretty well, buddy.
He's taken it a little too far. The first half of what his solution is pretty much almost all he needs to do.
And I would say cover your foam layer with an additional layer of plywood. And you should always use polyiso, we tell people, when you can, because it's the most benign of the foam insulation materials environmentally. But you need the plywood there because rodents will still get through that and find that very cozy in your floor system, as they do now, I'm sure.
Yeah, I thought there's an idea of adding a fireproofing layer. I've never heard anybody talk about that.
Well, what it is in
this context, I mean.
Basically, any place where foam is exposed to potential human access.
In living space.
In living space, they want a fireproof layer. So, like, I know you can get a polyiso that has a thicker layer of aluminum on it. What do they call it? Dow makes
Thermax,
it.
I think it is. Dow Thermax.
And that in some jurisdictions, it will suffice for the fire protection concern. But like Patrick said, the plywood could be treated as your air barrier, but more importantly, it's to keep the critters out.
Yeah, and don't leave any gaps. You know, you might be tempted to cut corners and not make it fit tightly, but you really need to make it fit tight and keep the.
Yeah, and if he does a nice job putting it in there, he doesn't have to use foam necessarily. If he gets it a tight fit, he can tape all the seams, which is a lot easier and more effective, I think, than.
And I like the idea of putting the poly on the soil. Yeah, it's going to stop the vapor movement, but also it's going to make it way nicer to work in there, right? You can even slip on your loafers or go in there and and work in like every crawl space like this. It's disgusting, right? It's scary. If we have photos of Steve's crawl space that we'll put up on the podcast page, and it's gross as heck.
And honestly, as far as like the skirt walls go, he should probably treat this like a vented crawl space now, because he's completely sealing it off from the conditioned space. So he could just rebuild those skirt walls. Maybe put a pressure treated piece on the bottom so it's not sitting on the dirt, and probably put some screen vents in a couple of places. Just if there's a moisture problem in there. But really, he doesn't have to worry about sealing off the crawl space once the air sealing is done at the floor level.
And manage water on the outside, right, as best you can. You don't want water going toward the open space under there. What were you going to say, Kiley?
His idea to run the poly up the wall, is that what you would do too?
I like things to be able to dry. I think I would skip that step.
Yeah. It's the poly. The only value in this situation for the poly is just to prevent large amounts of vapor coming up from the ground into the space. Yeah. And at the walls, you don't mind if that vapor is escaping out of the crawl space. It's kind of doing the similar job to what I did in my basement, putting that poly down in the insulation is kept the moisture down. I still haven't had to run my dehumidifier, and it would have been a moldy mess by now down there last year.
Are you trying to make me feel bad, like more than once today? You know, because
why do you say that?
Because I've been running my dehumidifier for weeks now, and I got my electric bill.
I was also trying to doubly make you feel bad for telling me my system wasn't worth it, or it was going to be too moisture sensitive or something.
I'm worried about a flood event in your basement.
What's going to happen? What's the worst that's going to happen?
Your sheathing is going to get all soaking wet.
Oh, come on. It's Advantech.
And it's never going to dry.
It's Advantech. You can soak that stuff in a hot tub for like a year.
I hope you're going to experiment with this when you get your hot tub up and running.
That's just what I was going to say. Prove it.
Do you have a cover for that thing? This thing's going to make you broke.
Did you buy more PV panels too to go with it?
I thought about it. I thought about putting some PV panels on my shed to boost my solar production.
Yeah, you better.
Yeah.
Okay, this comes from Jay. Jay asks, what details, considerations, ideas, and thoughts do you guys have on pouring concrete on above-grade framed floors? I was planning on doing 2.5-inch slabs on top of sealed subfloor and having 1/2-inch radiant heat in it, then polishing the surface to be the final floor. Thanks, Jay.
People do that, yeah?
Yeah. I don't know anything about this.
So, there's a lot of variables to consider here. I mean, I feel like if you've never done anything like this before, I would definitely reach out to some local experts.
Yeah, this is the job for a pro.
Yeah.
You got to think. First of all, we don't know if this is a new floor, or if he's engineering the floor to support this load. But basically, the first consideration is your floor strong enough to support a concrete slab? Mm-hmm. And then there's a lot of options for concrete, and depending on the radiant system you use and the type of concrete you use, it can range anywhere from like 1.5 inches thick to like 3 or 4 inches thick. And some people use lightweight concrete, but different types of concrete will polish differently. So probably gonna have to consider that if you're using this as a finished floor. So I would certainly probably talk to some local expert who's done concrete floors like that, and maybe you even need an engineer if you're going to be doing concrete over wood framing. But
go ahead, Kiley.
This seems like a really great article for Fine Homebuilding.
Yeah, it does. So Jay, if you figure out how to do this, give us a call.
I was actually looking, and I mean, we've done plenty of radiant heat stuff. We've done polished concrete. We've just never done the whole package of like someone doing of someone. So it's certainly, I was thinking that myself.
Especially if it's a retrofit. If it is an existing floor, figuring it all out would be really interesting, I would think.
So here's what I would say. I would first start by doing some research. I looked up on Latacrete, which is a reputable brand for mortars and cementatious products used in a lot of industries, but folks who listen to this show probably know their tile setting products, right, and grouts. It's a real good brand. And they have a product specifically designed for this kind of application. As far as getting this done, you just got to follow the instructions. And as Rob suggests, make sure your floors are up to it. My only experience with this subject is I happened to be on a photo shoot one time in Greenwich, Connecticut, very early in my career. I was photographing the installation of this very expensive media room in this very enormous house being built for an NBA basketball player. And these folks were doing gypsum topped floors, which is another way to handle this thing. And it's meant to be, in-floor radiant system. And instead of, cementatious, it's a gypsum product that's probably very similar, but it weighs less. But the thing I remember about this is they were pouring this stuff on the floor, and it's about the consistency of watery pancake batter. And I happened to go to the lower level of the house where the media room was going to be, and these folks were working above me, and all of a sudden, gypsum just starts pouring through the ceiling.
Oh, man.
And I'm like, I have to tell someone about this because I bet they don't know this is going on. So I run upstairs and I'm like, there's gypsum topping compound pouring into the basement. And the guys like look at each other and they run down the stairs, and then they're jamming like bits of fiberglass in the holes around the pipes where this was pouring through. It was hilarious.
Sounds professional. Does that product work as a finished surface? As a finished floor?
So I don't think so, Kiley, but I don't really know.
Sound like it would.
I think you'd put, some other flooring material on top of that.
Yeah.
It's just meant to embed the tubing, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, so like I said, there's a lot of variables here. It's like whether you can polish the type of concrete because there's lightweight concrete for applications like this, but it probably doesn't polish quite the same as like a typical slab mix. And I don't know, but I did find a Q&A from a while ago about this, but
so another thing to consider, I'm going to say it before I forget. Sorry, Rob. So I know like Mapai, which is another reputable tile setting company. It's Italian, and they make terrazzo products, and I love terrazzo,
Me
and
too.
it's totally would work great in this application, I suspect. So think about
That's a great
too.
idea, Patrick. If it would work, yeah.
I love it.
Me too.
Interestingly, Pittsburgh has a lot of it because I think it was developed when a lot of folks from Europe were emigrating, and the states to Roman times, these kind of terrazzo finishes. So, I mean, these folks know what the heck they're doing.
Neat. That's a neat idea.
What were you going to say, Rob? The Q&A question?
yeah,
Was it helpful?
I mean, it wasn't really detailed. It just talks about how, you can go as low as 2 inches thick. But I mean, it also depends on the mix. It depends on the situation.
This is a chemistry problem, right?
This is a Matt.
Yeah.
This is a Matt question. He could answer this. But is this the type of project though that, aside from, it seems like you'd want an engineer involved to figure out if the floor can hold the weight, right?
Well, I mean, it's pretty easy to figure out the company who makes the mix is going to tell you what it weighs, right? It just has to be able to support that weight. And my guess, it's not crazy, but it's also going to weigh more as when it's soaking wet, so you may have to prevent it from deflecting temporarily with some cribbing or false work, right? Like when you do poured concrete of any type that's unsupported.
This
I think
is
we've
one of those
taken this
projects.
conversation as far as we can go.
Yeah.
Yeah, but he should write in and tell us how he winds up doing it, because it's really interesting.
Yeah. I'm sure there are folks out there who have done this. If anyone out there has any thoughts on this, I'd love to hear from you. This comes from Brian in Huntsville, Alabama. Discussion about building costs have been a topic over the last year due to the pandemic. I never hear any conversation about concrete homes and would like your thoughts. There is one company in Houston, Texas, Eco Cast Homes. They can put a shell of a home to include a concrete roof up in 2 days and have it move-in ready in 60 days. Foundation and site prep may not be included in these estimates. I called the company in discussion. The rough shell with foundation and plumbing, I believe, was around $70 a square foot. Concrete seems like a great building alternative for so many reasons. Efficiency and strength of the system when produced in a controlled environment is one. Another is the fire and storm resistance that I would like to have being a resident of the South. There does not seem to be a lot of precast concrete home builders out there. EcoCast and Superior Walls are a few, but for some reason, this is not a viable or likable option for many, and that is why I presume there are so few. There was a home that was being advertised a while back called the Forever Home that up and just disappeared from the market. I think homes like this would be preferred for coastal environments, yet it seems wood is still preferred to protect all your life's possessions in hurricane-force winds. Hope to get your thoughts and appreciate your podcast. Brian, Huntsville, Alabama. Kiley, do you want to take this on first?
I bet you'll be surprised by what I decided to share.
Okay.
I was speaking with developers. They're neither architects nor builders. They're both developers in the Newburyport, Massachusetts area. This was a while back. They just built what they call the Hillside Center for Sustainable Living, and it's quite a project. I think there's 48 units, and it's a really complex not multi-family, but multi-unit development. Anyway, lots of really interesting sustainably minded practices going on there, but they used this concrete tilt-up wall assembly system that they just raved about. And I have to say, by the time I was done talking to them, I was almost convinced.
You were convinced.
I was. And they had their reasons for using it. And, some of them included the fact that it's a high performance envelope. And you should realize that so they are 28 foot tall by 18 feet wide gable walls with 5 windows. So it all comes pre-assembled. It's from Blueprint Biotics. Is that what that company's called?
I have no idea. Yeah.
Anyway, with 12 inches of EPS foam outboard of the structural interior concrete wall, magnesium oxide board siding, and fiber cement board. Let's see. Oh, excuse me. That's not what they used. They used the other side. So anyway, they had the reasons they were able to get to passive house levels with this product. And, they talked about not just the energy efficiency of it, but the durability, the low maintenance, the quiet interior spaces. There's no transfer between occupants. They're sharing walls. It's water resilient, and the whole system was very replicable. So, I'm pretty dead set against concrete for environmental reasons, but you can't argue with some of these things, especially right now with the cost of lumber. So I don't think it's out of the realm of possibilities, and especially if you're dealing with a fire-prone area. I don't know. What do you guys think?
Go ahead, Rob.
Well, I mean, in some parts of the country, it's actually super common to have concrete. I mean, many parts of the world, masonry buildings, for one reason or another, make more sense, whether it's availability of material or local, pest issues like termites in the south. I mean, a friend of mine lives on the Gulf Coast in Florida, and his house is all concrete, and that's just normal in a lot of wet locations and southern wet locations. Certainly concrete. People in the green building community and even more and more in the building community in general are trying to shy away from concrete as much as they can because of the amount of carbon it takes to produce it. But there's a lot of it complicates the process, and it changes the composition of the concrete. But there's a lot of things people can add to concrete to make it less of an environmental concern, like fly ash is one of them. And that's like we were talking about Roman concrete and terrazzo earlier. It's like that's something that's been done for thousands of years too. They use volcanic ash in the concrete, and it's a durable and more environmentally friendly way to do it. I mean, I think what it comes down to is like anytime you have supply and demand and cost calculations, you're going to see different materials become more popular. I mean, just like people don't do solar hot water anymore because it's cheaper to just do solar PV and run your water heater off of that. Where 10 years ago there were all these fancy hot water systems. Same thing with framing. It's like you're gonna probably see a lot of people doing metal framed houses. Because metal studs are still cheaper than wood studs right now.
I wonder how rammed earth compares these days, cost-wise, to lumber and concrete.
I mean, I feel like that's probably a niche.
It's so labor-intensive, Kiley.
I know.
I mean, that's really kind of something that's people are doing for different reasons other than it being the ideal material to build a house with.
I think
depending on who you talk to.
The carbon is definitely a problem. I've charged Liam with making concrete without all the CO2 emissions, so that's his job. And I'll let you know when he's done with that.
So stay tuned.
I wouldn't be surprised if he figures it out.
Yeah, no, neither would I.
He's trying to, integrate his interest in volcanology and, solving the climate change crisis. So I think,
Good boy.
I've tasked him with this, and we'll see what happens.
For everyone who's listening who doesn't know that, we're talking about Patrick's son.
Who's 15, right?
Yes. He better get to freaking work, right?
Yeah.
So concrete homes are not new. I think on the Gulf Coast, hurricane-prone areas, I think it's fine. In the desert Southwest, wood materials and other things have made stucco the preferred building material for centuries, So, I mean...
There's an interesting project that I can point this listener to that he might like to read about. It's Dan Nelson of Designs Northwest. It's referred to as the Tsunami House. So if you it's been covered a lot, but it's a really interesting build in that it's on Whidbey. I think it's Whidbey Island. It's in the Pacific Northwest in a very there's a lot of seismic activity there. So he designed this concrete floating slab for the lower half of the framing structure. It sits on 9 feet concrete columns, which are tied into the slab with rebar. And then it's a steel moment frame tied into the concrete frame. It's just this really interesting hybrid system designed for, lateral seismic activity or, to withstand those types of forces. But anyway, that's a heavy use of concrete in a really targeted way to solve a problem.
Well, one thing,
and I think there's something to be said for that.
one thing you really have to think about too, and this is you hear this a lot in people who are building high performance homes nowadays. We've kind of come up with a bunch of different systems that work really well, and the pros and cons often come down to what is your local labor force comfortable with.
That's true.
Yeah. Jeff, what do you think about this? I mean,
particularly like the system that Kiley was talking about, it's like they're front loading a lot of the carbon footprint of that building. And I'm not sure that that's necessarily the right way to go these days.
Yeah.
The tilt-up system is adapted from commercial work, right? Where I watched a grocery store get built, warehouse style in what seemed like months, and then it was open. It's extremely fast. Yeah.
Some of those tilt-up systems, for commercial and warehouse purposes, they're sort of like the opposite of an ICF, which I think is like the ideal. Like I feel like sometimes ICFs are kind of like backwards because they're putting the concrete,
easily damaged
parts on the outside, but they, you can also get like, what are those basement wall systems where the foam is embedded in the wall?
Superior walls is the thing this gentleman was asking about.
Yep. Yeah. So,
that's what this system was. And the concrete was poured, the wall system came with all of the windows in place, all of the insulation in place. They laid it down on the job site, and then they filled it with concrete. So the concrete is actually to the interior. It's really interesting.
That's interesting.
Yeah. I'll include the link because there's a great graphic that goes along with this story, and it's on both Green Building and Fine Homebuilding.
In the I think it was the early '90s, there was and he's still working, a Pittsburgh documentary filmmaker. His name is Rick Seaback, and he's a great filmmaker for people who live or are from Pittsburgh because he really understands the weirdness of the whole place, and I love his work. But anyway, in the early '90s, he did this documentary called Houses Around Here. And south of Pittsburgh was this development. It was company housing. And the homes were all entirely built of concrete. And one of the things I remember from this documentary was they were interviewing this woman who had lived in this house for decades, right? She was probably in her 70s. And she says, the whole thing is concrete. You look in the basement, you look up to see the ceiling, it's concrete, the walls are concrete, you can't hang a picture anywhere. She's like, I would hear workmen in the basement, and they didn't think I could hear them, and they would be cursing because they were trying to run pipes or wires through concrete.
I would think
so
it
keep
would be
that in mind. If you have a concrete house, it is going to be less easy to change it, so you better make sure you really like it.
I wonder how there's so many questions. I'm trying to picture a window installation in a concrete house.
One of those gas-powered saws. Just big, giant gas-powered wet circular saw. That's what you use.
I'm going to say one other thing about this. So after Hurricane Katrina, I went there a year after to cover the rebuilding effort for JLC. And we saw every type of house style and construction method on the Gulf Coast, right? And even the concrete houses in that storm washed away. So
really?
there are sometimes some events that no type of house can sustain. So that was something else I would say to keep in mind. You'd see the concrete piers for the concrete house, but the house was gone because, a wall of water has so much energy that even, reinforced concrete cannot hold it back. This comes from
Mitch,
thanks. Tom.
No, Mitch.
Okay, let's do Mitch. Hey, Fine Homebuilding Podcast. I'm a big fan. I'm a young remodeling contractor out of Boise, Idaho, and I'm thinking about taking a big step in the future of my company, despite what many of my older mentors are advising me to do. Like every other contractor who returns phone calls in Boise, I have more work on my hands than I can handle, and without the help of some other like-minded friends with their own single-man companies, I would be completely overwhelmed. So I am looking to you for guidance. When do you think is the right time to hire on full-time employees? It seems to make sense to start building sooner than later, yet the past builders that I have worked under are telling me the same thing. Wait as long as you can before you hire anyone. Even my insurance agent toots that horn. Then those same people are telling me how hard it is to find good help. If I've got good other people now, doesn't it make sense to lock them in and start building together as one company? Other than the additional paperwork, insurance, and workers' comp expenses, what do you guys think are additional deterrents for joining forces? I feel like my company is going through its formidable, pubescent years. I'm chomping at the bit to take on more work and employees while also trying to understand that it's been all roses and rainbows to this point, and we never have had to stay afloat while keeping an economic downturn at bay. It's a confusing and exciting time. I'm a big fan of Sean Van Dyke and would love to hear him on your podcast again. Also, Tim Mueller is my hero. Thanks for being my construction dads and mom. Because of you guys, I will not walk the parade of homes until our production builders stop toting a HERS rating of 70.
Oh, well,
These are such good questions.
It's a good question.
He pointed out Tim Mueller and Tim and Brian. I mean, like they're certainly a great model to follow. Those guys, they do their homework. They're just really dedicated and focused on running a business well. But even another person, just on the podcast last week, we just started launching the KCA podcast, which Patrick, you did our little intro for, and it's kind of thrown in the mix of our regular podcast schedule. And one of the most recent one was Josh Salinger, who is a builder out of Portland, Oregon, right? And he talks about how he was in the same kind of boat as this guy. He just started taking on bigger projects, and he took on a project that was he was a solo carpenter, took on a project that he pretty much lost his shirt on, had to take a mortgage out to pay for his losses on it. Right. But looking back, he said that was like basically paying for his education. I mean, he realized
that's one way to do it.
He realized what he learned, and Mitch can hopefully learn this without going through that kind of a pain, is he needed to focus on the business, but while he was focusing on the growth. And it's like, you need to have someone who's doing all the roles. And it's like, you need to be willing to be the business, running the business, and you need to be focused on getting to a point. If he's already got good people working for him and you have a reputation for doing good work, you need to not take every single job that comes along, because Josh is known for the quality of work that he does and the culture of his company now, and that he went through a couple of really hard times to sort of get to that point. So if you can kind of learn from people like that and not have to go through those really hard times, learn that you have to focus on your employees. You have to make sure you have all the right types of employees to run a small business. It's not just adding some extra carpenters. You got to have a business manager, or at least in the beginning, probably hire like a part-time bookkeeper.
Oh my gosh, would you calm down? This person asked about hiring their first employee, and you're like ready to launch them into corporate America.
Well,
right?
No, but you can't, you got to be careful jumping in. I mean, I'm saying it's a great idea, but you just have to make sure you do all your homework and you've got all the bases covered as you're making those moves.
It strikes me that one of the major considerations would be, is it going to generate money? Is hiring somebody going to increase the bottom line, right?
Well, that's a very, businessy kind of answer, Kiley.
Well, I read an article on entrepreneur.com about this, and they made some interesting suggestions. Like, it's time to hire if you can identify a number of things that need to be done that will also increase revenue, and hire when the tasks to be completed fall under a particular skill set. And they also recommended for your first hire to look for somebody with co-founder potential with a specific set of skills.
That's what I was going to say. You know, maybe you don't need an employee. Maybe you need a partnership. And I hesitate to say that because I know so many contractors who started out in partnerships that went bad. So if you're going to do that, make sure it's the right person and make sure your skill sets are complementary. I think you're sometimes attracted to a partner who's like you, but that's not necessarily the person you want. You want someone who's going to do the things in the business that need to be done that you're not doing, right?
And if you are, no matter whether you've got a partner or employees, I think it's key to have policies and procedures and communication methods, all that stuff sort of laid out. Because if you're just sort of winging it as you bring on more people, it's easy to do that when you're like, I was in kind of a similar boat where I was working as a solo carpenter, and I had a bunch of friends who were contractors, and we all kind of just sort of banded together and then went solo whenever the bigger or smaller projects came along.
That's what he's talking about. That's the kind of relationship he has right now.
Yeah, and it's common. I think it's really common because people are scared to start a business, but it's easy to have friends in the business who you enjoy working with. But once it becomes a shared actual business, I think you just have to make sure things are a little bit more formal so that everyone has the same expectations.
So it would be good for him to find a model of a company that he can foresee himself, replicating.
Yeah, I would say it's always easier to follow someone else's lead than invent it completely on your own, right?
Yeah.
And you can adapt, the methods and model to your own needs.
I
would also say you really got to make sure that you have your company set up better than the gentleman you were just talking about who had to mortgage his home to pay for a project that went south, right? That's why we incorporate. That's why we have businesses, so we don't have to lose our personal assets in, a deal gone wrong.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is, he's at a point now where he got through that first project. He kind of learned his lesson. The thing that I don't hear from a lot of these people, and it's kind of similar to the question we had earlier about how you integrate, building science and energy stuff into a project. How do you learn to run a good business? It's like you can go to your local, there's local business mentorship programs in most states. But I mean, really, I think the best way to learn is from someone else who's doing the same kind of work. I feel like we need another article or even some blog posts on this. Sean Van Dyke, I know, has done a lot of that for us over the years.
It is the singular biggest question for a new contractor, right? When is the right time to hire someone to help me out? Because everyone starts out either working for someone else or working solo, it seems like. I don't have any good answers, Mitch. It is a huge step, and I think everyone who has made this step is surprised that their employees don't work as much as they do. I think that's always a shock. And I think you really need more work than you think you do to pay someone and cover their labor burden, right? You're not only paying their wages, you're also paying their workman's comp insurance, and hopefully you're paying for their medical insurance. And it's a lot more money than you think it is. Oh, this was a great show today. What do you all think?
Definitely.
Do you think they'll keep us employed for another week?
Well,
God, I hope so.
It doesn't air for more than another week, so we got
so
that buffer.
For now.
We got that buffer.
Well, guess who's here at my house? I have to go. It feels like Mr. Rogers. Matt Kenny just showed up. He's borrowing tools from me, which is his favorite pastime. So.
Actually, I need to borrow. Do you have a weed whacker, Patrick?
No.
Oh. Do you, Rob?
I've got a cordless one.
I need a weed whacker. I don't want to buy one. I just need to use one.
You can buy one that uses the same batteries as your lawnmower.
Yeah, you totally can.
It's like $130 or something.
I don't want to keep filling up my shed with tools like that.
You got a basement too.
Because
I want to.
I want to move.
What's wrong with you? Well, unfortunately, that is all the time we have today. Thanks to Jeff, Rob, and Kiley for joining me, and thanks to all of you for listening. Please remember to send your comments, questions, and suggestions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com. Stay safe, everybody. Keep craft alive. Happy building.